My name is Anastasia, and on the very night of my father's will reading, the chairman of a major construction company, my entire world collapsed. Tens of millions of dollars in assets were not left to me as everyone had always assumed, but instead handed entirely to my husband Ethan and my own sister Clara. The moment Ethan held Clara's hand a little too tightly, I knew this wasn't simply a legal arrangement. It was betrayal. Family, love, marriage. Everything had been nothing more than a staged performance. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by the very people closest to you? If it were you, would you stay silent and accept it, or would you fight to take back the truth? Leave your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can follow my journey. Because right now I'm going to tell you everything. The story of how I turned betrayal into strength. In the years before, I truly believed I was the luckiest woman alive. Ethan, my husband, was the kind of man everyone adored. He had a calm smile, deep brown eyes, and a way of speaking that made you feel completely heard. He worked as an attorney for a financial firm in Houston, was ambitious, well-dressed, and most importantly, the man my father trusted deeply. I still remember the very first family dinner when Ethan met my parents. While my mother asked warm questions about his background and career, my father simply watched him the entire evening with that familiar, evaluative gaze. The look of a man who had built an empire from nothing. And then, when the evening ended, my father gently patted my shoulder and said, "Keep this one close." I laughed. At that moment, I truly believed I was with the man destiny had written into my life. My sister, Clara, was an entirely different world. She was 4 years younger than I was, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and always looked as though she had stepped straight out of a fashion campaign. She studied design, then quit. Opened a cafe, then shut it down. Tried selling cosmetics online, but lost interest after 3 months. My parents always protected her. "She's just trying to find her own path," my mother would say. And my father would dismiss concerns. "Clara lives from her heart. Don't force her to calculate like we do." Truthfully, I wasn't jealous. On the contrary, I felt sorry for her. I was used to being the one carrying everything. The reliable older sister, the trouble-free daughter, the wife who kept the family intact. In the early years of my marriage, Ethan and I were perfectly in sync. Each morning he would make coffee for me and I would prepare breakfast for him. Friday nights were no phones. We would cook, play jazz, and share the small stories of our week. Ethan would listen as I spoke about little patients at the community center, and I would fixate on his funny courtroom tales. Everything seemed like it couldn't get any better. Saturday was family day. My mother cooked my father's favorite beef stew. Clara would be half an hour late with some very Clara excuse. 8 consecutive red lights, lost a shoe, or went to buy wine and ended up trying on dresses. Ethan always laughed at those excuses, shaking his head teasingly. "No one fits chaos better than your sister." I thought it was a throwaway joke. One time I walked into the kitchen and saw Ethan and Clara talking on the back porch. He was fixing the backyard light for my father, while Clara stood nearby holding a glass of lemonade. They were laughing, unaware that I'd paused at the doorway for a few seconds. I saw the look in my sister's eyes, slightly tilted, half curious, half admiring, but I told myself, it's nothing. He's her brother-in-law. Being close is normal. I was never someone suspicious by nature. In fact, I was always the peacemaker whenever there were tensions at home. I had lived my entire life that way, accommodating, smoothing things over, keeping everything peaceful. Once, after my father was hospitalized due to a diabetes complication, I stayed up many nights watching over him. Ethan stayed by my side, holding me when I collapsed in the hospital hallway. Clara, however, disappeared for days. When she finally returned, she simply said, "I can't stand hospitals. The smell scares me." I didn't blame her. I quietly took on her part. On the day my father finally recovered and returned home, I sat beside him all afternoon, reading company documents aloud, updating him on unfinished contracts. He listened silently, then suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought about taking over?" I froze. I had never considered it. I was busy with my work in the community, feeling useful in a different way. I shook my head and replied, "You have Ethan. And Clara's trying to help with marketing too, isn't she?" He sighed and gazed out toward the garden. "Ethan is an outsider. No matter how good he is, he's not blood. And Clara, she isn't stable enough." I didn't know what to say. I thought he was simply worrying too much. In the days that followed, I noticed Clara showing up at my father's company more often. She dressed more professionally, chatted with several management-level employees, and even posted photos of her new workplace online. I asked about it, but my mother waved it off. She needs to feel your father believes in her. Let her try. Ethan praised Clara's progress. I'm impressed. Clara's been hardworking lately. I once saw her in the office later than me. Some might say I should have seen it sooner. But you know, when you live in a family where everything is coded in the words, everything is fine, you slowly lose the ability to tell truth from illusion. Especially when the people you love most, your husband, your sister, look at you with such gentle eyes that nothing seems wrong. I didn't know that while I was worried about my father's health, Clara and Ethan were having meetings of their own that weren't family-related. I didn't know that on nights when I came home late from night shifts, someone else had been standing in my kitchen, smiling at Ethan as he opened a bottle of wine. I didn't know, or maybe I didn't want to know. Because when you believe in someone long enough, you start overlooking all the little things, glances, laughter, absences, to keep your life from shattering. But then the little cracks accumulate and one day you touch them and your whole world breaks like glass. I began to realize the small fractures in my marriage could no longer be hidden. My father was still alive at that time, though his health had declined significantly, but he remained the type to track every number and every project in his company. Meanwhile, Ethan was becoming increasingly busy and rarely home. At first, I told myself it was because of pressure at work. But over time, his explanations grew repetitive, like lines he had rehearsed. I've got a client meeting tonight, probably home late. Ethan texted, attaching his usual smiling emoji. I stared at the screen and typed, "Do you want me to bring you dinner?" But then deleted it. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who constantly checked up. So I simply replied, "Then please remember to eat something." Setting my phone down, I looked around the quiet kitchen. Just a few months ago, this place was filled with his laughter while I cooked. Now it was so empty that even the ticking clock felt loud. Clara, on the other hand, started showing up at my father's company more often. She frequently posted photos from meeting rooms, along with passionate captions about change and reform. I was a bit surprised but quietly pleased, thinking that perhaps my little sister had finally grown up, thinking beyond clothes and parties for once. My father nodded, though there was still a hint of skepticism in his eyes. One morning, while I was on a business trip in Dallas for a medical conference, I stopped by the hotel lobby to check out. The staff handed me a stack of papers and by accident, a bill was filed in the wrong slot. I glanced at it, intending to return it when the name Ethan Miller jumped out at me. Beneath it was the signature Clara Roberts. I froze for a few seconds. The bill showed 2 nights at a hotel right in downtown Houston, barely more than a 20-minute drive from our home. I swallowed hard, trying to reassure myself, maybe it's a mistake. Maybe they were attending a company meeting together. I folded the paper and handed it back to the clerk, forcing myself to remain calm. But during the rest of my trip, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why hadn't Ethan said anything? Why was Clara silent too? When I came home, I tried probing gently. Over dinner, I served him food and casually asked, "Have you been working with Clara more often lately?" Ethan looked up, hesitated slightly, then quickly nodded. "Oh, a few times. Your dad wants her to learn more. You know Clara, enthusiastic but inexperienced, so I've been helping her." He gave me that familiar reassuring smile. I managed a small nod in return, even as something tightened deep inside my chest. I didn't ask about the hotel bill. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer. A week later at my father's house, I saw something that made me uncomfortable. Clara was at the dining table telling a funny story and everyone was laughing. Ethan sat across from her, his eyes fixed on her, occasionally jumping in to add to the story. The way he leaned back in his chair, hand resting lightly under his chin, eyes lit with amusement. It was exactly how he used to look at me when we first dated. I stayed silent, but a kind of unease I had never felt before began to grow inside me. That night as he drove me home, Ethan said, "You look tired. Is something wrong?" "No," I shook my head, keeping my voice gentle. "Probably just work." He squeezed my hand. "Don't push yourself too hard. I'm here always." But the look in his eyes as he said that, I didn't believe it anymore. Over the following days, I began paying closer attention. Ethan's schedule developed odd gaps that were hard to explain. Once he said he had a client meeting in Austin, but when I called the office, his assistant said he had left with Miss Clara. When I asked him about it, Ethan said, "You must have misheard. I went with another partner. Clara had her own plans today." The reply came too fast, too smoothly. Clara, meanwhile, grew strangely enthusiastic. She often called me asking, "Are you free? I want to discuss the company's media plan with Ethan. Do you want to come along?" The invitation sounded polite, but felt more like a way of letting me know she and my husband were meeting. Each time I said I was busy. Not because I didn't have time, but because I didn't want to become an observer in my own life. One afternoon when I got off work early, Ethan's car wasn't in the garage. I called him and he said he was at the office. But when I drove past my father's company, the parking lot was almost empty, except for Clara's familiar silver sedan right by the front door. I sat in my car, heart pounding, but then drove away. I didn't dare stop. That night, Ethan came home late. He walked in, loosened his tie, and a faint, unfamiliar cologne lingered around him. I purposely asked, "Long day?" "Yeah, lots of meetings." He took off his jacket, avoiding my eyes. I said nothing more. We ate dinner in silence. The sound of cutlery touching plates felt loud, as though counting down to some inevitable explosion. Those cracks, the hotel bill, the shared glances, the small lies, began stacking up. I still had no proof, no courage to accuse. But deep inside, something was beginning to break. And sometimes, silence is more terrifying than confession. I remember very clearly the night after the will reading. Not because of the wine lingering from the funeral reception, but because Ethan's words pierced my heart like a cold blade. When the guest had left, and only the wind slipped through the windows and dim yellow lights flickered across the vast living room, I stood facing Ethan. Clara hovered behind him as if she had already found her new protector. "What do you expect to hear from me?" Ethan folded his arms, his voice calm to the point of being shameless. "The truth is clear. Clara and I will take the company further. Are too weak to carry it." I had spent my whole life being the backbone of this family. I never wanted the company's spotlight, nor had I fought anyone for position. Yet that sentence from the very man I shared a bed with felt like a verdict casting me aside. Clara leaned toward him, lips curling into a triumphant smile. She was no longer the clumsy little sister I once protected, but a woman who knew she had just taken the most precious thing from her sister's hands. I asked, my voice trembling, "How long?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at me, then turned to Clara as if weighing whether to tell the truth or keep lying. Clara spoke first. "You don't need to know. What matters is Dad trusted me now. And Ethan," she brushed her fingers lightly along his sleeve, "is on my side." I laughed. A dry, cracked laugh. "Trusted? Do you know how many times Dad had to pay off your childish adventures? And now you think you can carry an entire company?" Clara hesitated, irritation flashing in her eyes, but she lifted her chin. "I have Ethan. He believes in me." I turned to Ethan, waiting for him to defend me, even with an empty, comforting phrase, but he said nothing, and that wordless response cut deeper than any confession could. Curled up on the sofa, my mother's eyes were swollen and rimmed red, her silence heavier than anything she could have said. I searched her face for the slightest spark of justice, some sign she would protect me, but found only avoidance. She bowed her head, clutching her rosary in silence. "So that's it," I whispered, every word heavy in my chest. "My sister and my husband. The two people I trusted most." Ethan sighed as though he were the one wounded. "Don't dramatize everything. This is the logical decision. Your father understood that too." "Logical? You call betrayal logical? You call destroying my trust logical? Don't act like you're the only victim. I've sacrificed plenty, always stuck in the shadow of your family. I deserve more." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, murmuring loud enough for me to hear, "Don't waste your breath, Ethan. She'll never understand." My heart tightened. Every thread of family connection snapped in that moment. You can take the company. You can take Dad's trust. But what you stole was family. And once that's gone, it never comes back. Clara's hand trembled slightly, but she pressed her lips together proudly. "Family is something I never truly had from you, Anastasia. You were always the perfect daughter, trusted by Mom and Dad. For the first time, I finally get to be in that position." I turned away, not wanting them to see my tears. I had lost everything in one night. My father's grave hadn't even turned cold, yet the people I loved were already standing on my grief to seize what they wanted. I walked toward the staircase, feet heavy as stone. Behind me, Ethan's voice echoed, "You should accept reality. We'll never go back to what we were." I gripped the wooden handrail so tightly my fingers went numb. I wanted to turn back and scream, to tear off that mask of deceit. But I didn't. I silently climbed the stairs, leaving them under the flickering yellow light. In my room, I sank onto the floor back against the closed door. The silence was so intense I could hear my own heartbeat racing. All the once beautiful images. Ethan holding me as my father walked me down the aisle, Clara hugging me when I had my college heartbreak, were now sharp shards stabbing at my mind. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the family photo on my table, me standing between Ethan and Clara, all smiling. A harmless picture, yet now it only reminded me how foolish I had been to believe love and blood could protect me from betrayal. And from that moment on, I was completely alone. The day of the family meeting, our familiar living room suddenly turned into a courtroom without a judge. I took my place at one end of the long table, a thick stack of documents laid out before me. Across the top it read clearly, "Renunciation of inheritance rights." My mother occupied the head of the table, her eyes tired yet resolute. Clara lounged back with her legs crossed, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder as if publicly asserting her new position. The family lawyer, who had served my father for more than 20 years, was also present. He slid the papers toward me, his tone even. "Anastasia, if you sign here, all the formalities will be completed quickly. The family will avoid unnecessary troubles." The black and white text before me mocked. I was not only being removed from the company, but also asked to give up the legacy my father had built with blood and sweat. For what? I looked up, my voice tightening. "So you can make me disappear neatly?" Clara let out a soft laugh but turned away when she met my eyes. Ethan remained calm. "Don't make this more difficult, Anna. You're not suited for battles like this. Your father made his choice." I turned to my mother, hoping she would at least defend me. But she folded her hands in her lap and shook her head. "My child, sometimes stepping back is the only way to keep peace. Blood cannot be denied. No matter what, you and Claire are still sisters." "Blood? Then what about me, mother? Am I not your daughter? Or is Clara the only one worth protecting?" No one answered. That night a few close friends came over. They gathered around the kitchen table, sipping coffee and speaking gently. "Anna, maybe you should let it go. After all, Ethan was your husband and Clara is your sister. Why hold on when it will only break your heart more in the end?" "Exactly. Just consider it a sacrifice. Family is what lasts forever." I sat and listened, each word like a needle. Family? The family that pushed me out of my father's house and forced me to sign away my own rights? I smiled and let it pass, but once they left, my tears finally fell. That night, the house was so silent I could hear my own footsteps echo across the wooden floor. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to the image of my father, sitting at his desk, calloused hands turning the pages of his ledgers. That old office of his was a room I had long avoided. I opened the door. Dust coated the bookshelves. The smell of old wood mixed with traces of tobacco. In the corner sat a gray safe, the one my father had never allowed anyone to touch. I stood there for a long time, resting my hand on the freezing metal. When he was alive, my father once said, "Some secrets must be kept until the right moment." At the time I didn't understand. But now, with everything collapsing around me, I knew he might have left me another path. I searched through old drawers and found a small set of keys. My heart pounded as I slid one into the lock. The click startled me. The safe door opened, revealing neatly bundled documents and a small wooden box. I took a deep breath and laid them out on the desk. My hands trembled as I opened the first file. Financial figures. Detailed reports. All in my father's familiar handwriting. He had monitored the company more closely than I knew. Inside were also irregular documents. Hidden expenses, questionable transactions, invoices matching the dates Ethan once claimed he was out on business. A chill ran down my spine. Father had known. He had seen Ethan's corruption. I opened the wooden box. Inside lay a black USB drive and a handwritten letter. My father's shaky but steady script appeared. "Anastasia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to protect you. I know you will be pushed aside by the people you trust most. But my daughter, do not be afraid. All of my hidden shares, 40% of the company, have already been placed into a trust in your name. The legal documents and proof are on this USB. You are the only one I trust to preserve what truly belongs to this family. Do not let weakness blind you. You are far stronger than you believe. I read the letter over and over. Each sentence both warmed and tore at my heart. All these years I had believed Father favored Clara, that I was always standing behind keeping balance. But he had understood everything. He had seen the fractures, anticipated the betrayal, and chosen to protect me in the quietest way. I clutched the letter, tears soaking the page. The isolation and despair I felt hours earlier began to lift. For the first time I saw a glimmer of light in the darkness. But with it came fear. If Ethan and Clara discovered this secret, they wouldn't stop at forcing me to sign papers. They would destroy me completely. I remained in that office for hours, my fingers wrapped tightly around the USB. Outside the window, the wind howled through the trees like my father whispering, "Stand up. Do not let them erase you." In that moment, I knew I was no longer the woman who simply yielded. Everything they thought I had lost might only be surface. Father had given me a trump card, a truth powerful enough to change everything. That night, the desk lamp cast a glow over the dusty safe. I paused as the door groaned shut behind me. Inside the safe were no jewels as I once imagined. Instead, one small USB, a few worn leather notebooks, and a tied stack of documents. My heart thudded in my chest. I opened each one and my father's words appeared before me. The first journal read, "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I trust that you understand. This company is not flesh and blood but truth. And truth, my daughter, needs someone strong enough to defend it." Tears blurred my vision. My father had known. He had seen the cracks in our family, the greed creeping into every meal and meeting. And he left me not a message, but a way forward. Inside the documents was a special share agreement, 40% hidden ownership, not declared in the public will. His signature and legal seals made it undeniable. Next to it, the USB was filled with financial data. I plugged it into my laptop, watching file after file appear. Transaction logs, falsified invoices, funds siphoned while Ethan was acting as deputy CFO. I felt as though my father's hand rested on my shoulder, firm yet gentle. He knew Ethan's true nature. He knew Clara would plunge ahead blindly. But instead of exposing them himself, he left the key to me, letting me decide whether to use it or walk away. Ethan's words from earlier echoed in my head. "You're too weak to carry this." And Clara's triumphant smile still seemed to linger in that conference room. But here, between these old papers, I finally saw. My father never believed I was weak. I turned the journal pages. In one entry he wrote, "Strength is not never falling but knowing when to rise again, even if you are alone." I burst into sobs, clutching the notebook as if embracing my father one last time. That night, his old office no longer felt like a place that abandoned me. It became a place that fueled me. I touched the USB, the contract, the journal pages, and whispered to myself, "If this is the choice Father wanted me to make, I won't back down." Outside, the wind howled through the trees as though reminding me that the real battle was still ahead. But this time I didn't feel alone. I had my father, I had the truth, and I had myself, something they had misjudged all these years. I left the big house with a small suitcase and moved into a modest apartment in the suburbs. Everyone thought I had surrendered, that I had voluntarily stepped out of the fight. Rumors surrounded me like a verdict. "She knows her place. Better to let her older sister and husband handle things. Or she wasn't tough enough after all." I didn't need to argue. Because in my hands, my father's secret was waiting for its moment to speak. On my first day in the new apartment, I sat alone by the window, watching streetlights glow through thin curtains. It seemed empty. Yet in truth I had never been more certain. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning I called my private attorney, Mr. Harris, an old friend of my father's. His voice was low and slightly trembling when I mentioned my father's name. "His daughter? You finally called. I've been waiting for this day." I brought the USB and the special contract to his office. The room was filled with files and the smell of old paper, a place built to hold hidden truths. Harris read every line, his eyes lighting up. "This evidence is enough to turn everything around." Do you understand its power? I understand. And I also know my father didn't leave it behind for revenge, but so I could choose the right path. Then you must be ready to live in silence, to bury your anger as you prepare. It won't be easy. I gave a faint smile. I've lived my whole life in silence already, sir. In the weeks that followed, I acted as if I'd surrendered. I moved into my new apartment, did my old job, and kept my head down. Ethan and Clara occasionally sent cryptic messages, checking whether I had signed the waiver. I replied briefly, I need more time. That only assured them I had accepted defeat. But each night when the city fell quiet, I worked alongside my attorney, reviewing every detail. We backed up the USB, categorized the documents, and built an airtight case. One evening, Mr. Harris placed his hand on the thick file and looked at me. Do you know Ethan once stole corporate funds to make private investments, and then used your father's money to cover the losses? If the shareholders find out, they'll finally see who truly deserves their trust. Outside of meetings with my lawyer, I quietly reached out to my father's trusted shareholders. Not everyone believed me. One man scoffed. You're the daughter cast out by your own family. Do you really think we'll believe you? Calmly, I laid a few photocopied documents in front of him. A heavy silence filled the room as he read the undeniable numbers. Eventually, a few of them looked up, their expressions changed. If what you're saying is true, we've trusted the wrong person all this time. I'm not asking for pity. I want my father's company protected. Slowly, those secret meetings sparked confidence. They started calling and texting me for more information. I knew, piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. Sometimes at night, I would stare at the hidden share contract my father left me. 40%, a number that looked small but was the key. I whispered into the darkness. Father, I won't let your life's work be buried. One rainy evening, I returned to my apartment and found Clara standing at my door. She wore a long coat, eyes sharp with suspicion. Where have you been all month? Clara demanded. Ethan says you're plotting something. I calmly unlocked the door, not inviting her in. I want peace, Clara. Isn't that what you always wanted too? She stared hard at me, searching for a crack, but I gave her none. Finally, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing sharply down the hallway. I closed the door, my heart pounding, but I knew then, my performance was working. Day by day, I lived that facade, letting them believe I had lost. But in truth, I was building my counterattack in silence. A shareholders' meeting was approaching, and I knew that moment of destiny was near. The hotel ballroom glittered with lights. Red velvet drapes hung from the ceiling, long white cloth tables shimmered with crystal glasses. From a distance behind the glass doors, I watched Ethan and Clara step onto the stage together. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit. My sister draped herself in ocean blue satin, trying her best to look powerful. Thunderous applause erupted as Ethan raised his glass. Tonight, we welcome a new era for Whitmore Group. One of transparency, strength, and a great promise. I smiled slightly. Transparency? He had no idea I held the entire truth. When the party reached its peak, I walked through the main doors. My heels clicking across the marble made a few heads turn. Gasps spread across the room as I approached, dressed in a fitted black gown, hair swept up, lips painted deep crimson. An older businessman whispered, "Is that Anastasia?" I thought she disappeared. Clara immediately stepped down from the stage, her face tightening. "What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to sound haughty. I ignored her and walked straight to the podium. Ethan forced a smile, raising his hand as if welcoming me. "Anastasia, what a surprise to see you. But I'm afraid tonight, there's no room for outsiders." I stopped and turned to the front row of shareholders. My voice rang clear through the microphone. "Outsider? I'm sorry, but I never left this game. In fact, I still hold 40% of the company's shares." The entire room froze. People shot out of their seats, murmuring wildly. Ethan's face darkened as he turned to his assistant in disbelief. "That's impossible," he stammered. "I checked everything." I opened my leather case and laid documents stamped by the bank and law offices onto the podium. "These are the share certificates my father signed over to me before his death. Legally notarized, fully binding." A board member spoke sternly. "If this is valid, Anastasia remains the largest shareholder." I continued. "And I'm not just here to remind you of my rights. I'm here to reveal the truth. Ethan has been embezzling funds for 2 years, using company money for personal expenses including luxury trips, with Clara. An uproar swept through the ballroom. Clara went pale, her lips trembling. You're lying. Ethan was only... I cut her off coldly. Would you like me to display the hotel invoices along with security footage, Clara? She stood frozen. Ethan began to sweat but tried to hold composure. This is all a misunderstanding. Can explain. Another shareholder, Mr. Harrison, slammed a hand on the table. Explain these shady wire transfers then. We've suspected something for a while but now everything is clear. The room exploded with noise. Guests pulled out their phones, snapping pictures and recording video. Ethan lost his grip. Anastasia, you're trying to destroy me. No, Ethan. You destroyed yourself. I'm simply bringing the truth into the light. Clara tried to grab his arm but he pushed her away, the spectacle only fueling more whispers. The interim chairman rose and declared. Effective immediately, Ethan Whitmore is suspended from his position as CEO pending formal investigation. The applause started in patches, then swelled into a roaring ovation. Ethan shouted desperately. You can't do this to me. I built this company into what it is today. I looked at him calmly. A company cannot grow on lies. Claire shook ghost white. A woman nearby whispered, shaking her head. She brought this upon herself. Drawing a steady breath, I faced the board, my voice firm. From now on, I will stand behind my 40% and work with all of you to protect Whitmore Group's reputation. I refuse to let my father's legacy be buried under greed and betrayal. Thunderous applause filled the ballroom, louder than the opening toast. Ethan stood motionless, hatred burning in his eyes, while Clara stared at the floor, unable to face anyone. I stepped down and blended into the crowd, but I could feel every pair of eyes on me. That night, I knew I was no longer the forgotten shadow. I remember clearly, after the gala's bright lights faded and the guests dispersed, Ethan was quietly escorted out in a ring of security officers. The news spread like wildfire. By morning, headlines everywhere read, Young CEO toppled at his own gala. But the price he would pay didn't end with losing his title. Authorities launched a formal investigation, and the financial documents I'd spent months gathering became irrefutable evidence. Ethan now faced not just the loss of his career, but a courtroom. Claire was different. She wasn't handcuffed, but the judging stares, headline exposes, and whispered media gossip were harsher than any chains. The label homewrecker clung to her name, and every social door that had once opened for her now slammed shut. One afternoon, as I stepped out of the company building, I found my mother waiting on the steps. She wore a simple wool coat, far from her usual stern appearance. Her eyes were swollen, likely from many sleepless nights. I want to talk to you, she rasped. We sat in a small corner cafe where few people would recognize us. For a long time she said nothing, then slowly spoke. You know, your father saw everything early on. He knew Ethan wasn't worthy, knew Clara only wanted to take advantage, but he kept quiet because he wanted to see if you were strong enough to protect this legacy. All this time I thought I had been fighting the world alone. Yet in truth my father had been watching me in his own way. He believed in you. My mother placed her trembling hand over mine. And now, I do too. I never wanted things to become like this, I whispered. I only wanted the truth to come to light. She nodded softly, tears filling her eyes. I know. You're not like Ethan. You don't need revenge in order to win. There was no satisfaction in my heart, no desire to crush anyone. Instead, there was a strange peace. The truth had done its work, and finally I could breathe without carrying the weight of doubt. A few weeks later, the company began to transform. The board held emergency meetings to restructure, and for the first time I sat in the central seat, the one my father once occupied. Many eyes turned toward me, not with suspicion but with expectation. An older shareholder, Mr. Harris, approached me after the meeting. Your father used to say, if anyone can uphold this company's spirit, it's my daughter. Today I see he was right. I smiled in thanks. In that moment, I felt clearly that my father's legacy wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet. It was the trust he left behind in those who once stood beside him. Meanwhile, news about Ethan grew more relentless. His assets were frozen, friends deserted him, and the people who once surrounded him vanished. I saw him on the evening news, gaunt, bewildered, no longer the confident man who once stood proudly on stage. Clara disappeared from high society. Some said she fled to another city. Others said she lived off the last of her jewelry. Whatever the truth, her name became nothing more than a whispered insult at parties. One evening, while sitting in my father's old office, I opened an outdated drawer and found a letter he had written, likely years ago. The ink was faded, but the message read clearly, "Daughter, never let hatred lead the way. The one who stays calm after the storm is truly strong." I set the letter down, feeling lighter than I had in years. He was right. I didn't need to drive Ethan or Clara into ruin. The law and the truth would take care of that. As for me, I chose to keep the peace my father always wanted for me. A year later, the garden behind our old home looked very different. The rose beds my father once tended bloomed again, carrying a sweet scent in the morning breeze. I often woke at 5 a.m. walking the stone path into the garden so I could breathe in the damp earth and savor a quiet I had never known before. The company had changed for the better after the crisis. Rather than chase power plays, I funneled much of the profits into a charity named after my father. The fund provided scholarships, medical assistance, and meals to poor children in rural areas. Each week, I visited community centers, sitting with the kids, reading to them, or simply listening. One day, a skinny, curly-haired boy with bright eyes tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Ma'am, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor so I can take care of my mom." I looked at his small face, overcome with emotion. In him I glimpsed my father, a man who had devoted his life to leaving behind something I could carry forward. News about Ethan still appeared occasionally. He was sentenced to several years in prison for financial fraud. The once proud man who strutted down red carpets with Clara now bowed his head in front of cameras. Clara vanished from the spotlight entirely. Some said she lived quietly in a small suburban apartment. One day, as I was leaving the community center, I spotted her in the distance, gaunt and weary. Our eyes met, and she lowered her head before turning away without a word. My mother changed as well. Eventually, she lowered herself onto the seat beside me, her hand trembling as she placed it over mine, voice breaking. "Your father knew the truth all along. He believed only you were clear-headed enough to carry this legacy. It was wrong not to stand by you." I answered softly, "I never wanted to fight, Mother. I wanted to protect what he left behind." She rested her head on my shoulder like a mother asking her daughter for strength. During that time, I finally learned how to let go of old wounds. Instead of drowning in resentment, I let the law and the truth speak for me. Strangely, that calm made me feel freer than ever before. One afternoon, while looking out over the city from my office window, my assistant brought me a letter. It came from a rural elementary school where our charity had just funded a new library. The handwriting was messy but full of joy. "Thank you for our new books. We promise to study hard so we won't let you down." I held the letter, my eyes burning. No profit or financial report could ever bring me this kind of fulfillment. That evening, I returned to the garden. The scent of roses drifted on the wind, and in the distance I could almost hear my father's warm, steady laughter. I whispered, "The truth may be cruel, but it is the only thing that sets us free." In that moment of stillness, I felt I had truly risen from the ashes. My story is no longer about betrayal or loss, but about finding myself amid destruction. Standing in this garden, I know that peace is only just beginning to bloom. As I stand here where my father once stood, I realize each person who hears this story will feel something different. Some may see it as justice served, others as a journey of reclaiming dignity and self-worth. To me, the most important lesson was learning how to let go of bitterness so I could move forward in peace. I believe all of us have carried wounds, from family or betrayal, that weigh heavily on our hearts. But what sets us apart is the choice. Do we let those wounds drag us down, or use them as fire to light a new path? I want to hear your thoughts. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose forgiveness, or let truth and justice speak on your behalf? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else who is still searching for a way out of their own pain.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.